Tēnā koutou katoa kei ngā mana kei ngā reo. Nau mai hara mai ki tēnei hōtaka hou e kia nei ko Tapatahi. Whakatau mai rā ki tēnei pai kōrero, ki konei tātou mātiro atu ai, wānanga ai, wete ai i ngā take nui o te wā. Ko tahi ana ki te kaupapa, ko te huakito nei, ko te mate karauna. Ko tā mātou mahi, ko te whakatakoto atu i ngā kōrero ki mua i a koutou, hei kai, hei matapaki mā koutou. Mōhio tonu tātou he nui ngā kōrero e whiua haeretia ana i te takiwā. Heoi, ko tā whakaata Māori, he tuku atu i ngā kōrero tika, i ngā kōrero pono ki a koutou. Ka tira, tēnā no tātou katoa, and welcome to our very first show of Tapatahi. Māori Television is committed to providing you with accurate, up-to-the-minute and trustworthy information to help you make decisions about your life and well-being. Tapatahi is an online program that will ask questions of officials and decision makers, share Māori stories and perspectives, and keep Māori informed about COVID-19. Tapatahi literally means to unite and is taken from the well-known Māori song Tūtira mai ngā iwi. Now we're here to ask the questions that you want answers to. So if you have a partai, please let us know and we'll put them to our guests. And talking about guests, we have a great lineup today. Shortly, we'll be discussing the government's guidelines for tangihanga and what that means for you. We'll be talking with John Whaanga, the Deputy Director of Māori Health at the Ministry of Health, and Francis Tipene from the popular program The Casketeers. But first, here's the latest on COVID-19 in 30 seconds. A West Coast woman has become the first person to die in Aotearoa from COVID-19. The kuia was aged in her 70s and had underlying health conditions. E aroha atu ana ki tērā kuia me te whānau pani. Nō reira kei ngā mate, haere atu rā koutou. Tātou ka mahu e iho nei, tēnā no tātou katoa. Another 63 new cases have been added to the nation's tally, which takes the country's COVID-19 cases now to 514. Police have launched a new online form to dob in people or businesses suspected of being in breach of the lockdown. More than 660,000 infections have been confirmed globally and more than 30,000 deaths. Nearly 140,000 patients have recovered. Kāti, kia huri ake tātou i naia nei ki te manuhiri tuatahi. The Minister for Māori Development, Nanaia Mahuta, tēnā koe, nau mai, whakatau mai.
Tēnā koe, kia ora.
Minister, before we talk about how the government is supporting Māori, how are you coping in your household, in your bubble?
Well, my bubble's pretty small at the moment in our household. We're coping okay. Look, I came back from the kapahaka event over in Canberra and self-isolated as a precautionary measure. So for 2 weeks prior to the lockdown, I was already in self-isolation. We got used to the change in the way things had to happen around the house, and we were able to prepare our children as well. So, you know, I'm thinking about all the other families who haven't been used to self-isolation and now coming to terms with its true impact.
So tell us about your bubble. What does it look like?
Well, there's myself, my husband, our 2 children, and our family kuri. And that's pretty much it. We maintain contact with the rest of the whānau via our social media platforms. We've had a number of hui, and we're maintaining contact, obviously, with the kaumātua in our whānau and those organisations that are supporting our communities. And that's a big part of what I've been doing locally while I've been at home.
Now, of course, like us here at Whakaata Māori, work must continue. How are you coping with the workload and your work priorities as a minister?
Well, you know, when you're at home doing work, home life actually comes into play as well. So being a mum and being kind of at the beck and call of my children, kind of in juggling that with work, like many people do, has been a new phenomena. But we're making the best use of technology, certainly with our meetings with officials, with cabinets, with ministerial colleagues, with caucus colleagues. So that's been a big change and shift, but it's something that we've adapted to like many other workplaces. So work does continue.
Now, of the 514 confirmed cases, we understand about 4% or about 20 are known to be Māori. Do you have any advice on who they are and where they're located?
Yeah, there's more and more information coming through as community taking place. I think the point to remember certainly with our current numbers is that there's 4% of those confirmed cases of Māori, and we should expect as more community testing takes place that we'll have greater visibility of those numbers. The issue for us as a country, though, while we're in lockdown, is to ensure that we're enforcing the lockdown provisions so that everybody can stay safe. And that's very, very important. And the messages that our whānau receive actually become more important, because at week 2, at week 3, people may tire of being in this situation, but we cannot tire. We have to get on top of the virus that has a huge potential to have a bigger impact in Māori and Pacific communities.
I do want to talk about weeks 2 and 3 because we understand that we should be in a better position to understand the full impact of the virus on our communities. But before I do ask that, because I can see your baby is floating around you, so I just want to acknowledge that and mihi that. But returning to the question more seriously, what sort of advice are you receiving about the full impact of what COVID-19 or how it may impact Māori communities?
Look, what I want to say in the first instance is a huge mihi to all our essential services and our workers who continue to ensure that we are prepared for a health response, and they are working very hard through our DHBs, through our Māori health networks, our Māori providers, and our PHO and whānau ora networks. That's the first thing. The second thing, in terms of wider community welfare, is that iwi have participated, and the information coming through to me from my Māori electorate MPs is that there is greater coordination and integration of an on-the-ground response with the support of iwi. We welcome that and absolutely support that leadership. I think the other thing to remember is that many of our whānau are in a state of anxiety. We saw evidence of that when there was a little bit of panic buying. People thought, oh gosh, I haven't prepared enough, there might not be enough kai, and very practical things. And we've tried to ensure, the Prime Minister certainly has through her messaging, that we'll retain the supply chain to our supermarkets so that people will have access there. But some of the on-the-ground reports that we've received in smaller communities is about a state of readiness, levels of anxiety, access to food hiking, price hiking, and I think just really wanting assurance that they're not going to be left out in a response.
What about the potential impact, though, that COVID-19 can have on our communities? What sort of advice, or have you received any advice as to what that may look like?
Look, it's the rate of transmission, human-to-human transmission, that could have a devastating impact on many New Zealanders. But because we live in such communal places and spaces, bigger bubbles than what we're used to, the potential of that transmission is very high, which is why we've taken the preemptive measure of signalling an alert 4 status and having and locking down households to be confined within their bubbles. But also the big challenge for Māori is to be vigilant about the potential for the rate of spread should this take hold in our communities. And it's because of the nature of our communal living, our interactions, our day-to-day social interactions are very, very collective and communal.
I ask the question because there is a view, given our history, but also our levels of deprivation in our communities, that Māori could be the worst affected here in our country. Are you hearing similar views or receiving any advice that confirms that?
I think what the advice we've heard is that there are vulnerabilities where COVID-19 can absolutely exploit and take advantage of. We only need to look around the world to see the impact on other countries, the overwhelming of a health system that is unable to respond, and the potential impact on various groups. Our kaumātua, the elderly, a significantly vulnerable population group, but also those with compromised immune systems or underlying health issues. Now, when we layer that over the Māori population and our communal living and lifestyle, again, it wouldn't be hard to come up with the projection that we could be significantly impacted as we were with the influenza epidemic. However, I can say from the experience here in Waikato, and I'm sure many other iwi would have similar stories, is that while it hit us hard, we grew the resilience factors to be able to grow and learn from that situation, and it's resilience and the strength of our unity in a response that will get us through this very hard time.
The government, of course, has announced a range of different measures that will support businesses and people struggling during these times. I'm interested, though, to understand the uptake by Māori of the support that's being provided and the services being provided. Are you receiving any advice about that, based on our understanding, right, that Māori tend to be a group that don't access the support when it's provided or in place?
That's a really good question, and we're in day 5 of the lockdown, and many New Zealanders would have seen that we've been very quick to respond by signalling that the government wants to lean in to ensure that we can buffer as best we can the economic impacts of the decisions we're making, and then the package of supports that we're providing. I expect that over time we will get the numbers coming through with greater clarity and visibility of numbers of Māori. I think the general point, though, is that Māori also make up a significant proportion of the workforce population. And it's that information, I think, that we're getting through fairly quickly in terms of workplaces and the numbers of workplaces that are picking up the relief package, especially the wage subsidy scheme.
What about your ministry? We obviously have whānau ora and other Māori health and service providers supporting whānau. Knowing that Māori tend to work better with Māori and in a Māori-friendly way, is your ministry participating and contributing to the effort?
Yes, at a number of layers. If we take at the centre and all the coordination that is happening nationwide, Tipene Kōkiri is sitting alongside the Ministry of Health, alongside NEMA, the National Emergency Management Agency, which the CDEM decisions are made, as well as our own network of support through our regional teams. We are layered at the centre. We're present at the centre where we need to be, and then layered down through the regional and local footprint. What that's enabled us to do is not to overlap in areas where there are other government agencies and organisations better prepared to respond. So the health-related responses we've left to health. The community welfare, wellbeing responses, an area where we believe we can make a significant contribution and support the aspirations of our communities, our iwi, our Māori organisations.
I do want to, as we wrap up, I do want to get your view on the government's new guidelines for tangihanga, which basically ban tangi from being able to take place. What's your view on these guidelines?
These guidelines are really here for a level 4 alert kind of context, and the guidelines are to protect those that are living, and it will challenge not only Māori but other cultures who have ceremonial cultural customs around death. Now, this for myself would have to be one of the hardest areas to try and explain to our whānau, because we know that grieving is an important part of being able to recognise the contribution of those who have passed on, but also the legacy that they've left. I'm under no shadow of a doubt that even though these guidelines are restrictive, they are for this time and not forever. They will ultimately be for the greater protection of those that are living, and we have to find a way that still retains respect for those who have passed on. I'm sure we can get there, but it's going to require leadership and good communication to whānau who are grieving. As I say, there's no perfect way of doing this, but if we want to maintain the legacy of our loved ones and what they would hope for their children and their mokopuna, it's the survival of their whakapapa.
Minister, thank you very much for your time this morning. We do appreciate it. E mihi atu ana mātou ki a koe o tira ki tō miru whānau i kona. E mihi atu ana ki a koe.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou katoa. Kia ora.
Ka tira. As I mentioned there, the Ministry of Health has released specific guidelines which outline the stark choices for whānau in lieu of tangihanga, which are banned. The guidelines outline the options available for tūpāpaku, which are either immediate burial, cremation or refrigeration. Now, there are no viewings or karakia allowed at the funeral homes, and one whānau member may be allowed to go to the funeral home to help with arrangements. Long trips from cities to rural marae for burial have been ruled out. Here's Francis Tipene Allen from Te Ao Māori News with more.
Ko te tangihanga tētahi o ngā kawa tapura wātu o te Māori. Hei tā tēnei whānau, I pakeke tēnei āhuaranga. Ka mutu, I pakeke ake I raro I ngā here o te wā.
We have to say goodbye to our father in the driveway. We're not even allowed to go and watch our father being buried. And that's wrong from any whānau's point of view, not just Māori or Pacific Island or Chinese or any nationality. That's just not our way. We don't do that. It's like we're just, I don't know, it almost feels like we don't care about them.
Ka tini ki ngā whakahaere ko te whakakahore I ngā tangihanga nui nei, a whānau nei noki. Ka mutu hore kautaia te tai atu ki te nihu, te pungarehu, te whakamahara, ngā momo hui ma te putanoa. Hei tā te mano o Haven Falls, hei tā Allen Pukepuke, he pakeke, e rangi me ūtonu.
The major ones would be the inability for whānau to have an actual tangihanga, so the local cemeteries, council cemeteries are no longer allowing any whānau members to go to them, whether it be for burial or cremation. They're only allowing funeral directors to attend.
Tēnei wā kei te mahitahi tātou o ngā kaitia ki tūpāpaku a motu o Aotearoa ki te taha o te manatū Hauora, ki te whakatau he whakahaere, ko te nuinga o ngā whakahaere mō te haumaru I te tangata. Kia noho wehe.
Ko te taunga kia noho ko era I te mirumuru kotahi me te taonga o te pō e tai ana te poroporo aki I te mate.
My poor brother, I really felt for him and my nephew today because they weren't allowed to come here and help dress up my father. Just that in itself is just wrong.
He taimaha mo ngā whānau, he oi kua tūake ngā whare tūpāpaku pēnei a Haven Falls ki te whakaki I te kōhao ma ngā whānau.
They've asked for the opportunity to take on that kaitiaki responsibility, so we will see the tūpāpaku to the plot. We will provide karakia for the whānau and we will record that if the whānau want us to.
He was a proud man and he loved being surrounded by people and he loved waiatas.
Hakoa he nui te pēhi o ngā panonitanga ki runga I ngā whānau e wāke ana raumati kia ūtonu ki te aroha me te whakaaro nui.
Me tia ki tātou I a tātou anō. Whakarongo ki ngā tohutohu a ngā kaiwhakarite o te manatū Hauora. Ko te mea nui, ko tēnei mea te aroha.
Koutou kua wheturangitia e haere koutou ki o tātou tūpuna. Tā wharautia mātou I a mātou e koke tonu nei. Francis Tipene Allen, Te Ao Māori.
Joining me now to discuss this further is the Deputy Director General Māori Health, John Whaanga. Tēnā koe, John.
Tēnā koe, tēnā koutou.
And from the popular TV program, The Casketeers, Francis Tipene of Tipene Funerals. Tēnā koe.
Tēnā koe.
O tira, tēnā kōrua nau mai hara mai. And let me thank you both for the important work that you're doing and, of course, for joining us today to talk about this very sensitive issue. John, maybe if I can start with you. If there is a mate in the whānau, what do whānau need to do? Let's just walk through this process so that whānau really get a good understanding of what these new guidelines actually mean.
Yes, the advice we put out last week was a step-by-step process where they notify either their health provider or GP. It may be their a funeral director, or it may be the police. And there's a step-by-step process that we go through there, including the collection of the tūpāpaku by the funeral director. And certainly in the guidelines put out last week, that's that's where the end is for the whānau grieving process. Can I quickly add that there was a couple of other things we indicated last week. These are really trying times, and this is an area that we are extremely aware is highly emotional and deeply personal to families. On any given day in this country, over 100 people die, regardless of COVID-19. So this is something that we wanted to make sure that we were open for further advice. Now, as a result of advice received by the Māori funeral directors and by iwi and Māori experts over the weekend, what I'm hoping to do today is to release an addition to those guidelines, where we're looking at the concept is how do we keep a family bubble in terms of being the absolute thing we must do. As the Prime Minister has said, that's the absolute thing we must do. But after getting good advice from Ricky Solomon and others, and I know they're connected with Tipene Funeral Services and others, for instance, and even Haven Falls, we think there's a way that we can provide for families, not just Māori families, but for families general to at least have a grieving pathway. Now, it's not going to be ideal. I have to stress that. But what I want to say is that we realise this is a huge area for our people. And if there is an opportunity as we move towards this to keep some humanity in what it is we do, then we're obviously very interested in doing that and doing that in partnership with others. Because if things move on to as they have overseas, there won't be much option at all. Certainly in this period, we think there is, particularly when we're dealing with deaths that, as far as I'm aware, have no relationship to COVID-19, for instance, some tragic circumstances. So I really want to acknowledge the work and the guidance provided particularly by Māori funeral directors and others at the end of last week. But we had to go out with some advice to say to people, look, hard as this might be, we cannot have tangihanga in the way we've used to. That cannot happen under level 4. But as I said, we have been open to get further advice about how is it we provide a pathway for grieving within the family, at least the family within the bubble.
So what are those changes that you're looking to announce today?
I need to make sure they get finally approved. But
it sounds like you're looking to extend. So at the moment, as we know, one whānau member is able to visit the funeral parlour to be able to sort out arrangements. Is that likely to be extended to more?
So it all depends on the bubble. So the first thing is we have to maintain the bubble. So within the whānau bubble of that tūpāpaku, that's where we're looking for an opportunity for a grieving process. The other constraint we have is people can't move between regions. So this is something that will obviously need to be sorted out, particularly and funeral directors have a key role here in looking at what the options are. Even currently funeral directors have that role. For instance, refrigeration may not be something available to all funeral directors. Certainly some have. But that'll be something that we'll need to work out clearly with the funeral directors. The other thing is they've given us very good advice about how they would make sure things like physical distancing are deployed to make sure that people are kept safe. So I think, it's a challenging area, but I really appreciate that people have pointed out to us some of the practical difficulties and also worked with us in a way to say, here's how we might practically respond.
And we will flesh out some of those practical challenges with Francis and you shortly. I just want to pick up your comment around travel in between, for example, urban centres and travel from, say for me, Auckland. Am I able to travel down to Hawke's Bay, for example, if there is somebody that we lose down there?
No, I mean, I had the same issue myself. I come not too far from, well, actually part of me comes from Nungwa Wahine too, but we had a circumstance in Nuhaka last week where a person who's a close cousin of my father passed away, and I had to advise family members that they couldn't travel. Some of them were the children of this particular person who died. So it's not possible to travel between regions. But as I said, what we think we worked on is at least an elegant solution to provide at least a limited whānau pathway for grief. And as I said, we've got to make sure that we keep the fundamentals in place. The whānau bubble is really important. The travel between regions can't happen. Those are fundamentals in level 4.
Francis Tipene, I want to bring you in now if I can. You have shared quite vocally your concerns with the guidelines and so far that you've put up some advice and recommendations to the ministry, which we'll talk about shortly. But I just want to get a sense from you, how are whānau coping in the current climate? You will be close to whānau who are losing loved ones at the moment. How are they coping?
Kia ora. Thank you. Kia ora, Shane. Kia ora, John. Yeah, it's been surprising, really. You know, the first couple of days, the Thursday and the Friday and Saturday even, it was very difficult. You know, when you uplift the tūpāpaku from the home or the hospital, and that's it. That's the finality of the service or the funeral or their time with their loved one. But since this morning and yesterday, and having a few calls and kōrero, our kaumātua puia, understandably, are very for this whole, the safety parameters which have been put in the guidelines. What has surprised me is the number of families that want to hold their tūpāpaku until the alert levels are lifted. You know, we'll do long-term embalms to hold the bodies in place because they still want to be able to carry out some sort of gathering in the future. And that shocked me. I thought they would have wanted to dispose of or bury or cremate the tūpāpaku and have a memorial later. But as you know, it's not quite the same. I think in a Pākehā culture, it's very normal for them to have memorial services. But for us, I think we need something physical in front of us to mihi to cry to and to talk to. And so the number of families, it's taken me back this morning, and I just had to reevaluate my whare mate to accommodate all the long hold or the long-term embalm tūpāpaku. So that has been very interesting, but not surprising.
How practical is that, though, in terms of refrigerating tūpāpaku? I imagine, given the numbers that we see on a daily basis, as John has mentioned, how practical, though, will that be for a service, for example, that you currently provide?
The call is, it's not really about refrigeration. Although if you don't want embalming, you can refrigerate. If you look in Italy, you'll see all the bodies, they're not in fridges, they're just in the churches. So whether they've embalmed the bodies, I'm not sure, but there is a special procedure in place where you do a long-term embalming, place the tūpāpaku into the casket and close the lid. Maybe every other day we'll go in and put some moisturizer on the body to make sure they're looking okay, but this part is about us monitoring the tūpāpaku to see how they go. And in the long term, should they not look their best, then when the time comes and the alert levels are lifted, the casket will remain sealed. But for now, it is about placing bodies in our chapel, you know, all in a row until such time as the alert levels are lifted. That does come with some complications. I mean, if people come from the same rohe in the same area, their marae are going to be inundated with tangihanga. So it is a balancing act, and that's where we come into play to talk to families. It's a holistic picture, not just about the tūpāpaku, but about marae. Can they cope with it when this is lifted? So we've got to think not just now, but in the future when this is lifted and we take, you know, everyone comes to collect their loved ones from the funeral home.
John, we know our tikanga. We don't leave our tūpāpaku alone. We stay with them throughout the entire process. Has much consideration been given to that part of our tikanga in the development of these guidelines?
Sorry, Shane, I missed some of that. My connection's really bad. I missed some of that. Would you mind repeating some of it again?
So, as we all know, our tikanga dictates that we don't leave our tūpāpaku alone. We stay with them throughout the process. And my question really is, has much consideration been given to that in the development of these guidelines? And is anything likely to change in light of that, given that you are looking to make changes today, possibly?
Sorry, Shane, the connection's really bad, but I think you're asking me how it is we're trying to respond to tikanga. So I think the first thing I have to say is that the tikanga of all New Zealanders, not just Māori, is severely curtailed by level 4. It doesn't matter which way you look at it, we are unable to give the fullest expression of our tikanga. But if there's something we can learn from the way our ancestors coped with earlier epidemics, the Great Depression and Great Wars, they were able to change and vary things too. I think what's most important for us at the moment is, as I said, if there's an opportunity to provide some basic humanity into the process, some basic grieving, that at least for the whānau in the bubble provides some avenue, but it's never going to be perfect. And look, I understand, and I saw your previous item there about the pain within individual families. I feel that pain. I felt that pain last week when I wanted to go home and do what I would have ordinarily done to farewell one of my uncles. So none of these things are ever perfect, but I think at least if we can show some humanity, if we can find a way to provide some grieving for families, that'll go some way to helping at least alleviate things, but it'll never be perfect. It'll never take away the pain. It'll never replace what we would have ordinarily done with our fullest extent of tikanga.
Francis, there is a possibility that we could be at alert level 4 for a lot longer than the 4 weeks that has currently been planned. What does that mean for you and your current approach? If we're likely to be guided by these guidelines for a lot longer than 4 weeks?
Yeah, kia ora. I don't actually, didn't really want to advertise the long-term environment holding the tūpāpaku for longer, because it could pose to be a problem for me in the future. But just moving forward, I was wanting to ask John about, us not being able to travel into region, but could we do it safely in terms of if family want their loved ones to go from Auckland, say, to Kaitohutohu, is it possible that the funeral director can transfer the body to a certain point and hand over to another funeral director to go and have the burial service there? Otherwise, we're going to end up, I think the goal is to get the loved one to the whānau urupa, and then later we can go back and have our prayers and continue our rituals and ceremony. But just in case things get out of hand and we end up, a bit like those photos in Italy here at the funeral home, we just want to be able to transfer loved ones from Auckland, outside of Auckland, safely. Obviously, health and safety is key and paramount. I'm all for that, absolutely. And I get the bubble kōrero. But as professionals, is it something that we're able to do to make this happen for families?
I think the way I'd like to respond to that, Francis, is that's something I'd want to work through with you. It'll be the details that'll either make this work or make it not work. So I think certainly for today, we got some really good advice last week, and I'm really keen to cement that and at least look at the concept of a whānau ability to be part of a grieving process within a bubble. But what I can say is I'm certainly open to talking with you and others about how we might make that work. As I said, it's the detail I need to work through, and then I'll need to connect up with the whole of government and other things they're doing. And as you know, there are extreme restrictions on travel around the country and certainly travel between regions. I'm not ruling it out. I'm saying let's keep talking about it and let's see if we can create a pathway.
Sure.
John, we're getting a number of questions, as you would appreciate, on this matter, and I do want to put a couple of them to you. One is about a tūpāpaku that is currently in Australia. And the advice that they've been given, this whānau, is that they need to wait for lockdown in terms of repatriation. Is that the correct advice? Is that what whānau need to do if they have a loved one or a tūpāpaku offshore?
Look, I think for now, without having explored that, I think they would have to wait until past. It's one thing dealing with things within our domestic borders, but and the lockdown. But don't forget, the lockdown will also affect, if we come through this, and I hope we do, and we're able to control transmission and we're able to localise and keep it that way, then our borders are going to be particularly critical for some months to come. I think the Prime Minister said this morning at least another 6 to 9 months. So it mightn't be any consolation to our Australian whānau, but I think for now, my initial response would be I don't think you would be able to transport tūpāpaku into the country in lockdown, and I'm not sure it's going to be particularly easy afterwards. It'll depend on our overall border restrictions, and we've got to be mindful of that. If we can control it in our country, if we can stop it from some of the effects from overseas, then going on after this, we absolutely have to protect our boundaries, and that'll go on for some time.
Another question that's come in is around the term that's being used to describe these guidelines. Are they guidelines? What happens if they're not followed? Is there any form of, what's the repercussions if these aren't followed?
Oh, I think I'd rather start this way, to be honest. We're all working to try and help New Zealanders get through a very difficult time. I think even the police, like Commissioner Bush and that, for instance, they've been very clear that we've got to show a bit of patience and tolerance. This is hard for our people. We've put them into lockdown. So we don't want to be going around with a big stick. But what I would also quickly add alongside that is we have these measures in place to protect all New Zealanders. And certainly if we have people who want to operate in a way which is going to put other New Zealanders and other Māori whānau in harm's way, then they leave us no choice. But, we don't go about the place. It's not our intention to go about the place with a big stick. These are highly emotional events. We understand that. We as a people, we're people who wear our emotions on our sleeves. And that's not going to change because of COVID-19. But we can't go around the place with our first option being a big stick. We've got to say to people, and I quickly add that our people have embraced these things. People have been changing tikanga for the last month. Our marae have been responding to these things and we've had leaders coming out saying, we have to do this whānau, it's hard. So, there are regulations in place and there are restrictions in place. And what I would say is they're in place to protect us all. It's not our intention to go around beating up on people. But I would also quickly add, if people put our communities and our people at risk, then we have no choice but to act.
What type of support is the ministry putting in place to help whānau deal with these circumstances, with this new way that we have to operate? Given the mental as well as physical impact that this is going to have on so many whānau. You mentioned before it's, obviously a very emotional experience to go through. But what support is being provided to help whānau deal with these times, specifically in relation to tangi?
Yes. I think for now there's the general support that's provided through areas like Healthline, but what we're also doing is reaching out to Māori organisations to see how it is we can extend the Healthline reach. Particularly, there's a simple principle people often say to me that they would prefer often to talk to another Māori person at the end of the line. So what we're looking at is how is it that we can get our people in contact with Māori people who are aware of their challenges, who are aware of tikanga. The other things that we are doing is obviously being very clear, and that's why the work we've done with the Funeral Directors Association and others is really important, on what the actual guidelines are around things like tangihanga and what it is they can and can't do, so we're very, very clear on that. And I have to say that largely speaking, people have been accepting of those things. Having said that, we've certainly had instances brought to our attention by Māori funeral directors and others where it's been really challenging. And, I take my hat off to the Māori funeral directors who've often been at the front line of trying to mediate, one, a very strong focus on health and safety, and two, how it is we bring some tikanga and some aroha and manaaki into what it is we do.
Francis, I want to end with you because the reality is these changes that we are now having to experience and obviously follow through with are going, what future effect do you think they're going to have on our communities, on our tikanga, and the way in which we farewell our loved ones?
I think the future will remain the same. I think as soon as the alert levels are lifted, we will go back to what we know, because it is important, and we'll be pushing that, because we talk about the Healthline and all these numbers to call for us as a people, and that's good. I feel like not a lot of us are into that. That's what's good about tangihanga, is we're a community, we like to grieve openly and seek help from one another in Christ. So I think we'll be pushing that in the future. But for now, there are some coping mechanisms we have in place. For example, the tūpāpaku has come into the chapel here with some live streaming. We'll open the lid for everyone to see the body. We call the minister in on the cell phone to have a karakia. And then there's also Zoom hui, so that they can actually talk to the tūpāpaku. So I'm so grateful that our people are adapting, and that is what tikanga is about. I'm all for actually these guidelines that have been put in place. I think with a bit of tweaking, we can make it work. Thank you, John, for that. But for now, it is getting that interaction with the whānau, be it through technology and just having that community time to grieve together with the tūpāpaku. But the future will revert back to what we know for now.
Well, I want to thank you both for joining us this morning and discussing this very sensitive issue. And of course, there still will be a lot more kōrero needed to have, and we'll certainly provide that forum to have that kōrero. John Whaanga, we look forward to receiving the changes that may be made to the current guidelines. And Francis, we thank you both for joining us today. Tēnā kōrua.
Tēnā hoki kōrua. Kia kaha tātou.
Ka tira e hika mā koina a Tapatahi mō tēnei rā. Kia piki te ora, te kaha me te māramatanga kia koutou katoa, hei kona mō tēnei wā.